Okay, so my name is Bimal Pariyar. So I am currently working as software developer in Gurzu. So mostly working with Ruby and Rails. So the topic is shipping Android with Rails. Recently, I had an opportunity to turn our existing Rails application and turn it into native Android application. So today, I mostly talk about what I learned on that session or what I learned on that project and what are the challenges we faced and how you can build the same application yourself. So let's get it started. Okay, fine. Oh, sorry. So what are the agenda? What are we going to talk about today? So the first topic is what is Hotwire Native? What is Hotwire Native? What are the features it ships with? And the another is why choose Hotwire Native? There are multiple frameworks that builds native applications. So why did we choose Hotwire Native? And the another is how. So how do you build a Hotwire Native mobile applications? And the last one is, or the fourth one is, how do you build it? So I'm going to build a small applications. I already have a blog application in Rails. So most of you already know Rails. So I'm not going to focus on that. But we're going to make that Rails web application and turn that into a native Android application. So another is production. So it's easy to say, it is easy to say that Android application building is easy, but in real scenario, in a real production environment, what are the things that broke, or what are the things that was most challenging to overcome on our project? And the last one is lessons, what I would do differently if I could start from the start. So what is Hotwire? So most of you working on Rails already know what Hotwire is. So it is just a simple way to build a Rails application that feels like a single page application. You can hot reload section of a page. So you already know what turbo drive is, what turbo frames are, what turbo streams are, and what stimulus controller are. So turbo drive handles the navigations. It ships with Rails 8.8 by default. Turbo frames, if you want to hot reload a section of a page. Turbo streams, if you want to broadcast a change over all applications. And the last one is stimulus. It's just a simple JS framework. So what is a Hotwire Native? So we already know what Hotwire is. So what is Hotwire Native? A Hotwire Native is nothing more than a wrapper. So let's say I have a native shell, and what native shell does is it just wraps around Rails application around it. So for example, let's say I wanna build an applications, and I wanna have a native features where I can use biometrics or I can use camera, but by default a web application cannot do that. That's why we need a native functionality that can access a native functionality on your app or on your device. So that so to overcome that, Hotwire Natives is the thing. So what Hotwire Native handles? Mostly a native handles navigations, backstack, your gestures or your biometrics, or native capabilities like push notifications, alerts, etc. And what WebView? WebView, we already know what WebView is. WebView just renders the HTML. And the Rails, still controls your controllers, your views, your business logic, and your authentications, etc. So Hotwire Native is just a shell what wraps around a Rails WebView. So what it is and what it isn't. So what it is, what Hotwire Native it is a native application shell. It feels like a native native mobile application. It has native navigations. It renders a Rails view. It renders a Rails HTML templates, and it has native capabilities, but you have to work around using Kotlin, and you have to bridge the gap between native and web applications. So what it isn't, it is not a Kotlin rewrite. You don't have to rewrite your whole code base into a Kotlin. You don't have to write Kotlin code or Android code or Flutter code. It is not a second front-end code base. Traditionally, if you want to build a mobile applications, what you would have to do is, first you build a web applications, and you write the same views, or you write the same application in either Kotlin or either in Flutter or React Native. But using Hotwire Native, you don't have to do that. Rails already handles your views. Rails already handles your authentications, your authorizations, but you just you just wrap around it and use the native functionalities. So is it a way? If we are using Rails, do we not have to work around app releases, or we don't have to work around Play Stores? It is not that. You still have to build an APK file and you have to push it to Play Store. And it is not just a plain web view wrapper. It is not just a plain web view wrapper, because a web view is just a functionality that renders a HTML template. But Hotwire Native, what it makes you do is it just let you access the native functionality of your device, like biometrics, push notification, etc. So the another questions you might ask is, if it's just a web view, why not just rewrite in Flutter or in Android or in React Native? Why use Hotwire Native? So initially, React Native or Flutter is an amazing framework, but our question was not that we need a mobile applications. In our case, we already had an amazing mobile responsive site or mobile responsive website. So our question was, how can you use that thing and build a native like applications? It was not just like we need a mobile application, but how do we use what we already had and build a mobile applications? And Hotwire Native let us do that. So it is a rewrite, create a second front end, but we just already had a template. So the trade-offs. So there are benefits to using Hotwire Native and there are trade-offs to using Hotwire Native. So the benefits are, you have one applications. You do not have to maintain a separate Android code base or separate Flutter code base. One code base is enough. Existing Rails skills. If you are already working on Rails, you do not need to learn new technology like Flutter or Dart or Android, Kotlin, etc. You already have Rails views, Rails technologies or Rails templates. You already tested your code in production and you do not need to do that again. So traditionally, if you want to update an app, so if let's say you want to add certain functionality to your app, you have to build it in native Android, and then you have to ship it to Play Store, and then they review it, and it takes some time, and then you see the updates. But if you use Hotwire Native, we just deploy the Rails, and then the changes automatically appears on our applications. That is the most beneficial thing of using Hotwire Native. And other is native capabilities when needed. So traditionally, it is just a wrapper. It is just a wrapper around Rails. But if you want to access a native functionalities like push notifications or biometrics or native share functionality, etc., you have to use a bridge component to bridge the gap between native and a web application. The trade-offs: less control over UI. So fair to say that it is more flexible to use already built native functionalities in Hotwire Native, in Android or in React Native, because they were built to build mobile applications. Hotwire Native is not. Some interaction need bridge works. Like some interactions, like I already told you, like push notifications, biometrics, still needs a bridge framework, or you have to write a Kotlin code for that. Some UI patterns need native components. Like if you want to have a native nav bar, you have to make changes in the Kotlin code. So not ideal for every applications. If you are not building in Rails, or if your web application is not built on Rails, it is not suitable to use Hotwire Native, because it is more preferable to use either Flutter or React Native. And network connectivity matters, because what Hotwire Native is essentially is a glorified web view that lets you have a native application. So internet is a must. You must connect to the internet. So let's learn about how you build Android code. So what you need to do is you have to change 4 files. You just go to Android Studio, build an interview applications, and you change on 4 files. You add 2 dependencies and 0 Android UI screens. Because the screens are already present in our Rails applications, you do not have to create a new UI screen. So, so how do you build it? Go to your Android Studio, create a new project, create an empty view activity, add 2 dependencies, configure your navigator, no Android screens, and point it to Rails. Just the 3rd step is create an empty view activity, add 2 dependencies, and point it to your Rails application, where Rails application is hosted in a server or etc. So that's how we do it. We'll see that live later. So the entry point. So main entry point of your applications is this. You just override the Hotwire activity method, and then you point it to your locations where Rails application lives, and then it handles your navigations because its navigation configuration is there. It handles your navigation automatically. Hotwire Native already have a navigator that handles backstacks. Like if you swipe back on your phone, it goes to your previous screens. That is automatically handled by Hotwire Native. So, so how do you know when your application is Hotwire Native or it's just a web application? In your Rails code, how does your Rails code know is it a Hotwire application or Hotwire Native application or just a web application? There is this thing called Hotwire Native app, this boolean. It's already pre-shipped in your Rails 8 applications. And in my case, I just made 2 views. One is mobile layout and another is just plain application layout. And we just switch between, if it is a Hotwire Native app, use mobile layout or application layout if it is not. So you will understand after we build it. So here is the working flow. There is a Rails template. Stimulus controls it. It goes to the Hotwire Native bridge or a component, Hotwire Native bridge component that handles the request coming from mobile applications. And then you go to the Kotlin. You have override the method from Kotlin. So you override the method. It handles the other. It handles the navigation stacks, etc. And then it renders via the Android API. So in our example, we will see that I have a share button, and then one button does 2 things. In web application, it just copy a link, and in our Android application, it just opens a share native share menu that you can share your blog. But similar issue did happen in our production applications. The thing we faced, or the most challenging part, was that we have to maintain our sessions. The session management was hard, and then push notification was easy, but the hard part was how you manage a shared session state. Like going back from one navigation panel to another navigation panel. Is the user logged in or is the user logged out? Those session management was the hard part. And the last thing was what I would do differently. So if I could start the production app or start building the production app differently, we would start the application by using the Turbo as a main framework. So we would start using Turbo as a start, because our application was not built, or it was not built to hot reload a section of a page. So we have to manually add those things later. So design the Turbo first. Build a mobile layout before Kotlin. So make a mobile responsive layout before Kotlin. Define a native boundaries, or every native boundaries. Define a native boundary. What should be handled by native application and what should be handled by Rails applications. And every other bridge needs a web fallback. So if you add any bridge component in your applications, you have to fall back. Your web application should have a fallback on what it should look like or what it should do. So those are the things I would do differently if I could start our project from the scratch. So, last slide is Hotwire Native a good fit? Is Hotwire Native a good fit for every applications? The answer is no. If you are already working with Rails application, Hotwire Native application is a good choice. But if you are starting from scratch, or if your application have heavy UIs, or if your application should work in offline mode, it is not a good framework, or it is not a good practice to use Hotwire Native. Hotwire Native should only be used when your Rails application is already have a robust mobile application and your Rails application is already built securely. So those are the things. Is Hotwire Native good fit?
The app reviewer, right?
So,
one of the trouble that we usually see is, especially with the App Store, the iOS App Store, they have a clause that says your particular application should have at least a minimum web functionality. It should not be a repackaged web app, right?
Yes.
So, in your particular experience, how difficult was getting this particular application built with this particular?
So surprising thing was it was surprisingly easy, because Hotwire Native it's भन्दा साउन्ड लाग्दा के हुन्छ भन्दा यो एउटा नेटिभ ऱ्यापर मात्र हो, जस्तै वेब भ्यू मात्र हो जस्तो साउन्ड हुन्छ, तर इट हेज अ नेटिभ फङ्सनालिटी क्या. जसरी कि हटवायर नेटिभमा बिल्ड गर्दाखेरि जस्तै कि तपाईँको ब्याक गर्दाखेरि जुन प्रिभियस स्टेटमा जान्छ नि, जस्तै कि लेट्स से यु आर इन अ ब्लग पेज एन्ड देन यु गो ब्याक टु द अथर पेज and you just swipe right or you just back navigation through your mobile applications, it should have a similar scroll position कहाँनिर छ त्यो कुरा चाहिँ हटवायर नेटिभ अलरेडी सिफ्ट गर्छ क्या. सो इट इज नट जस्ट अ वेब भ्यू ऱ्यापर मात्र होइन कि इट हेज अ नेटिभ फङ्सनालिटी क्या, अलरेडी बिल्ड विथ ब्याक स्ट्याक अनि इट इज अलरेडी हेज अ रोबस्ट नेभिगेसन स्ट्याक क्या. सो त्यसको कारणले के हो भन्दाखेरि इट इज प्ले स्टोरले के थिङ्क गर्छ भन्दाखेरि यो इन्टायरली वेब भ्यू ऱ्यापर होइन, इट हेज अ नेटिभ फङ्सनालिटी क्या. सो we build an APK with that. हामीले एउटा APK बनायौँ and then we just shipped regular जुन फङ्सनालिटी थियो, जुन स्क्रिनसट दिनुपर्ने and then have app logo and you just blah blah blah. So त्यो सबै एड गरेर just pushed it once and it didn't एप प्ले स्टोरले हामीले रिजेक्ट गरेन क्या, it just shipped क्या. So it was not very hard, but yeah, Rails Hotwire Natively already shipped with most of the native functionality, so it will not reject, the Play Store will not reject your application.
So basically your reasoning is like you already with some native functionality.
त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ लाइक इन्टायरली वेब भ्यू होइन, इट इज अ नेटिभ फङ्सन, इट हेज अ नेटिभ फङ्सनालिटी विच इज एक्सटेन्डेड थ्रु अ वेब भ्यू भनौँ न. सो त्यो टाइपले गरेर चाहिँ इट वाज नट हार्ड. सो आई हेभन डन विथ द एप स्टोर, एन्ड्रोइडको एप स्टोरकोमा चाहिँ मैले गरेँ होइन. सो आइ एम नट स्योर अबाउट द्याट वान, बट in Android case it was surprisingly easy, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I will take question. I think you are talking about